Democrats will have to explain that to the country. Congressman Jim Clyburn of South Carolina took a stab at it today on CNN. Here's how it went.
But why wouldn't a wall help improve security at the border?
Well, because we think if the wall is 10 feet high, they'll get a 12-foot ladder. That's just simple arithmetic to us.
Ah, the 12-foot ladder argument. Feels like we've heard that before from both parties. Jeb Bush used to drop the ladder argument at fundraisers in Palm Beach. People would smirk knowingly. Yeah, 12-foot ladders. Only dumb people believe in walls. As Congressman Clyburn said, it's simple arithmetic. Walls don't work. They never will. That's why nobody builds them anymore. Oh, but wait. In fact, plenty of countries still build walls. Some of those nations are allies of ours, countries we strongly support and heavily subsidize. They build walls because walls work exceedingly well. Nothing works better, in fact. And everybody knows that. So in some ways, Clyburn is behind the curve here, still trying to make a fact-based argument, even a ludicrous one. Most Democrats are far beyond that now, into the realm of the metaphysical. The Right Reverend Luis Gutierrez, who was also a Democratic congressman from Illinois, made the theological case against walls today as he questioned Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Gutierrez noted that people who support walls hate Jesus. It's that simple. Watch.
The majority on this committee must think you're doing a fantastic job because they've ordered this hearing so that you could come before us and look tough and remorseless just in the time for the holidays. It is repugnant to me and astonishing to me that during Christmas, I like to call them the holiday seasons to be inclusive, but during Christmas, because the majority always wants to just call it Christmas, that during Christmas, a time in which we celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, a Jesus Christ who had to flee for his life with Mary and Joseph. Thank God there wasn't a wall that stopped him from seeking refuge in Egypt. Thank God that wall wasn't there. And thank God there was an administration like this.
Yep, Trump's worse than Pharaoh. See? Jesus hated walls. It's right there in the scriptures in the book of Obama, chapter 6, verse 13. And all the people said, amen. Can I get a hallelujah? How does a public official respond to a sermon like that? Well, watch Secretary Nielsen try to respond. And as you do, pay special attention to the Right Reverend Gutierrez as she talks. Watch.
A policy of family separation would mean that any family that I encountered in the interior, I would separate. It would mean that any family that I found at a port of entry, I would separate. It would mean that every single family that I found illegally crossing, we would separate. We did none of those. What we did do is uphold the laws that Congress has passed, and we prosecuted those who choose to come here illegally.
Well, when you ask questions and then don't stick around to hear the answers, people might start to suspect that you're not really interested in learning anything. And of course, they're not interested. People who support open borders do so out of self-interest, more money, more voters, but also on faith. They just know they're right, and they know for a fact that you're evil. It's obvious. Well, maybe they're right. Maybe they are good people and you're irredeemably sinful. But that's not enough. Winning on virtue alone is not how our system works. You can only make people shut up and obey for so long. You can certainly silence them for a while. You can bully them into submission by calling them racist or throwing fake Bible verses at them. But that's only a short-term fix. At some point in a democracy, you have to convince them. And that starts by answering their questions. Why not a wall? Nothing else has worked. There are likely more than 20 million foreign nationals living illegally in America right now. They're all using fraudulent federal ID. They're making a mockery of this country and our laws. It's totally dysfunctional. It's disgraceful. Everybody knows that. Trump, whatever his faults, took the problem seriously. He promised a border wall. In the end, he did not deliver on that. That's on him. But instead of proposing a better idea or even acknowledging the seriousness of what is a legitimate crisis, the left decided to pretend that everything is fine and you're a bigot if you disagree. That's on them. They may not know it yet, but by winning the last election and stopping the border wall, the left just inherited responsibility for one of the biggest problems we as a country face. What is their problem and their plan now? Congressman Jim Jordan is a Republican representing Ohio, right in the middle of all this, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on. So the obvious question as we have the final debate over the wall during the final hours of the Republican Congress.
Yeah.
Why now? Why 2 years later?
Well, you're right. We should have done it earlier. We should have done it in March on the big spending bill. We told American people we would. Then we said, no, we're going to do it in September. Didn't do it then on that spending bill. Then we said we'll do it on December 7th. No, we didn't do then. And then we said we'll do it on December 21st. We did it tonight in the House. I mean, just a few minutes ago it passed. Even though last week in the Oval Office, Nancy Pelosi said the House can't get the votes to pass a border security wall, funding for a border security wall. We just did a few minutes ago, got 217 votes. I think the Democrats had 185. So we just passed it in the House. That's step one, and now it goes back to the Senate, and we'll see what happens from there. But we need to stand firm on this because, as you said, as the president said, this is a central promise we made the voters in 2016. This is our last best chance to do what everyone knows is just good common sense. Everyone but Democrats, I should say, knows is good common sense.
But I think it's fair for the rest of us to press a little deeper and ask, well, why didn't it happen? I mean, you're absolutely right. It should have happened. You probably would have preferred it had happened earlier. But
we pushed for it to happen earlier, yes.
Right. I remember. But it didn't, and that means that people prevented it from happening. Obviously, Speaker Ryan was one of them. Who else? Just so the rest of us can keep score.
Well, look, it's always easier. I mean, to do something that really counts and has lasting value, lasting meaning, it's never easy. So
it's hard, for sure.
Well, exactly. So anything worth doing is always difficult, but Congress always has a way of trying to take the least resistant route and do the easy thing. So that's why it happened, I think, most often.
Well, wait, but hold on. I mean, look, and I know you were for it, but the tax bill was definitely hard. There was a lot of opposition to it. And the leadership just decided we're getting this done.
Yes.
It's not something that Trump ran on or there was broad public support for, but they wanted it and they got it done. And they worked really hard, came on the show, made the case for it. They didn't do that with the wall. And why? Again, I think it's fair to know, since you're on the inside and we're not, who prevented that?
Well, I don't know what prevented it, but I think the intensity was more for the tax cuts than it was for repealing and replacing Obamacare and building the border security wall. I think you're right about that. But there's some intensity today. We've been pushing. And like I said, we just passed a bill that puts $5 billion for a border security wall. And that is a good first step.
Amen to that. Congressman, thanks very much for coming on for that update.
You bet, Tucker. Thank you.
Julian Epstein is a former chief counsel to the Democratic side of the House Judiciary Committee and a longtime guest on the show. He joins us today. Julian, thanks a lot for coming on. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm assuming, I mean, it's pretty late in the process that this is not going to happen. So Democrats will say, and Pelosi will say, we made good on our promise to stop the wall. Okay, great. But then there's the day after that when you have, by Yale's estimate, over 20 million people here illegally using fake IDs. It's out of control. What's the plan at that point to secure the border, the Democrats' plan?
I think, well, let's talk about good faith. I mean, I think the question you were asking Representative Jordan is, were the Republicans of good faith? President Trump famously told the Mexican president that he didn't really care about the wall in a conversation that was caught by U.S. intelligence.
That's all true.
The Republicans have been in control for 2 years.
I couldn't agree more.
Why haven't they passed anything?
Look, you don't need to convince me to that.
Is this an issue they like to tell your viewers and their voters that they're for?
Yes.
But it's just symbolic?
Yes.
It's a mirage?
I think Paul Ryan would like to leverage the enthusiasm and the donations of ordinary Republicans to win and then subvert their will on behalf of his donors once he gets there. I agree with that.
So you're being honest. So you're
being honest. Well, I mean, I don't work for anybody.
But you're being honest. That's right. So let's talk about good faith on the Democrats' part, which is what you asked about. I think the Democrats have to say in unequivocal terms, we are completely against open borders. We are against illegal immigration. We are for legal immigration. Now, they've done that. In the past, Democrats have voted $40 billion for border security. Including 700 miles of fencing and walls. Schumer is on record doing that. Donald Trump's position has changed from 2,000 miles of border wall to 700 miles of border wall. There's actually consensus for physical security, border security, physical security, a wall, fencing, where it makes sense. Not where it doesn't. Remember, 2/3 of the border area is controlled, either is owned by the states or owned by private individuals.
Okay.
Even if you got all the funding done today, you're going to be tied up in court for 10 years on eminent domain legal challenges on your ability to do this. But more importantly, I think
we just spent, just to put it in context, it's $5 billion for this wall as a start. We just spent, I think, $967 billion on a farm bill that literally gives tax dollars to the nieces and nephews of farmers for reasons that no one can explain to me. It's the most wasteful. It's disgusting, okay? And so it's not, this whole idea it's too expensive is just like such a transparent lie, it's not even worth addressing.
No, I didn't say it's expensive.
No, I don't think you were. But here's what I'm so struck by. Rather than make like an adult argument, we're getting Gutierrez lecturing us about Jesus.
Let me make an adult argument.
And wait, hold on. And then Speaker of the House lecturing us about Jesus. Now, I'm pro-Jesus, But like the partial birth abortion caucus is lecturing me about Jesus because, I mean, you know what I mean? It's insulting, actually.
So let me try to make an adult argument. I think it is political symbolism. I think it is something that the Trump campaign threw out at election time. And the reason I say that is because if you were serious about illegal immigration, which I think Democrats and Republicans ought to be, you would go after things that were going to make a difference. The primary cause, the primary suction tube of illegal immigration is visa overstays. Most people come here, they come on visas, and they overstay their visas. And going after visa overstays
well,
would be far more than well.
And
Secondly,
verify. I'm with you on that.
Well, let's go.
No, but look, it's a given. I agree.
If you want to go,
But what's wrong with the wall? But I just don't understand. Look, those are all components. We're in total agreement. But the wall works in a bunch of different countries. It works famously on Israel's border with Egypt. But we claim it won't work here. That's such a lie. Everyone knows it's a lie. Why not just say it works and let's just try it? I mean, what's wrong with that? I'm missing it.
So where the wall makes sense, I'm in complete agreement. We ought to do it. I don't think we ought to do it at 2,000 miles because many of those areas are completely impractical. They're incredibly mountainous. They're waterways. There's a complete.
That's fine. I mean,
plenty of places. So we already do have borders. We already do have physical security.
Can we both agree that? And a lot of our illegal immigration comes from visa overstays. I understand that. But
most of it.
Yeah, right. But there's still millions of people who've snuck over the border and are still living here. So why wouldn't you reassure the American people that we can all calm down and focus on a smart immigration policy that's, emotionally decelerated from where we are now? People feel like it's out of control because it is.
I think, well, it's getting better. We had 300,000 border apprehensions last year, which is the lowest since 74.
I guess relatively speaking, but it's still
the number of immigrants coming across the southern border is way down.
Hundreds of thousands. That's way bigger.
300,000. Okay. Used to be 750,000.
No, I'm just saying, that's much bigger than the city I grew up in. So, that's a lot of people. But why not just wall it off and then we can have a rational conversation?
So let's try and go back to this adult conversation if we can. I agree there ought to be physical security in places that it makes sense, not where it doesn't make sense. I don't think the two parties are engaged in that kind of conversation right now. But that's point one. Point two is the real problems here are not the border crossing. The real problems are visa overstays, as we just talked about. Second one is employers. The reason why undocumented immigrants stay here is because of employers. If Republicans, and I think Democrats should be here as well, if they're so serious about this problem, why is it that they don't do things that will upset the business community, like employers?
You're preaching to the choir completely. I think to see the activist left
there's a cynicism
aligned with rapacious employers looking to exploit labor is a little bit stunning. That's what Republicans have always done, and now all like the drones on the progressive side of the intersectional side are like, yeah, we're on the side of Amazon hiring cheaper labor. What?
So we're making a little bit of progress here, I think. I think physical security where it makes sense, not where it doesn't. Go after visa overstays, employer sanctions. The last point I would make to you is that
we're almost at time.
I don't think Mexico is the enemy here. Most of the illegal immigration that occurs on the southern border is Central America, not Mexicans. And more than half of the illegal is coming from Central America. But Mexico actually has a rather effective border security
system. But they've encouraged illegal immigration into this country.
They've actually deported hundreds of thousands of Central Americans.
They printed pamphlets telling people how to sneak across the border. So that doesn't seem like good.
I think Mexico could conceivably be much more of an ally than
it could. Hopefully, will be. Julian, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Good to see you. California Democrats have been very proud of their new sanctuary state law. Now a man released from prison thanks to that law apparently killed 2 people. Trace Gallagher has the details on this unfolding story. Trace.
Tucker, in the span of a few hours on Monday, police say Gustavo Garcia Ruiz carried out 11 crimes, including killing a stranger and shooting at others before he was killed during a high-speed police chase. Authorities think Garcia Ruiz also killed another man a day earlier. Last week, Garcia Ruiz was arrested in Central California for being under the influence of drugs. When ICE learned he was in jail, they placed an immigration detainer on him, asking deputies to notify them before releasing him. But under SB 54, California's sanctuary law, because the suspect wasn't being held on a felony, law enforcement is prohibited from honoring ICE detainers. ICE says this, quote, is an unfortunate and extremely tragic example of how public safety is impacted with laws or policies limiting local law enforcement agencies' ability to cooperate with ICE. And here's the gut kick. Garcia Ruiz is a known convicted violent criminal, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, repeatedly deported, etc. But under SB 54, none of that can be used to notify immigration agents. Here's the Tulare County Sheriff.
That tool has been removed from our hands. And because of that, our county was shot up by a violent criminal that could have easily been prevented had we had the opportunity to reach out to our fellow counterparts.
Sheriff says he doesn't want to enforce immigration laws. He just wants violent criminals off the streets. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher for us. Thank you very much, Trace. Well, France is still burning tonight over efforts to impose a climate change agenda there. So needless to say, some in our Congress are anxious to do the same thing here. Jeff Flake specifically, but others. We'll give you details after the break. Mattis announced today he'll be leaving his post, quitting in February after 2 years on the job. In his resignation letter, Mattis pointed toward policy disagreements he has with the president. He addressed the president directly in the letter, writing, quote, "Because you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours, I believe it is right for me to step down from my position." The announcement came as something of a surprise. It also came shortly after the president's equally surprising announcement he's withdrawing U.S. troops from Syria, a deeply unpopular decision among permanent Washington. Mattis reportedly opposed that withdrawal as well as a potential drawdown of American forces in Afghanistan. In a statement on Twitter, the president said this, quote, "General Mattis was a great help to me in getting allies and other countries to pay their share of military obligations. A new Secretary of Defense will be named shortly. I greatly thank Jim for his service." Well, it may seem surprising that the president is breaking with one of his top advisors, but there's another way to look at it. President Trump was told the U.S. could defeat ISIS and then leave Syria. Once it did, the U.S. did that. Now everyone in Washington is demanding he stay in Syria to counterbalance Russia and Iran. Last year, the same people told him that sending troops back to Afghanistan would greatly improve things in that country. That turned out to be completely false. The situation there seems worse than ever. And of course, for 2 years, the president has been told that if he'd just be patient, he'd have his border wall. How did that turn out? He apparently is not paying heed to their advice anymore. The administration today issued a strong condemnation of a major foreign power that routinely hacks American infrastructure, steals national secrets, technology, personal information in huge quantities. The director of the FBI called this country the greatest long-term threat to America's well-being. China, misread that. For more than 2 decades now, of course, it has always been China, America's greatest geopolitical rival. You wouldn't know that, though, from watching television. Even this week, with this new news about China, there's only one foreign power on the radar considered a threat. You know what it is.
The Russians exploited a massive backdoor into the foundation of our democracy.
Moscow's attack on American democracy.
The work by Russian agents to try to destabilize American democracy.
It's everything you need to know about the threat to our democracy.
The long-term damage is going to be to weaken our democracy.
You have Republicans who are silent and seemingly okay with this kind of attack on our democracy.
People are so stupid, it's amazing they're employed. Michael Pillsbury, not stupid and employed, director of the Center for Chinese Strategy, the Hudson Institute, author of the remarkable book, The 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. A strategy no longer secret thanks to his book. Mr. Pillsbury joins us tonight. Thank you very much for coming on. So this seems like a confirmation, this announcement today, of what we may have known, but still striking.
Yes, I think when the director of the FBI calls China our main rival, and then specifically said their goal is to replace us as the global superpower. That's the subtitle of my book.
Yes.
So it's not just good news for me, though, Tucker. It shows the recognition of the problem of China is now getting quite widespread.
Give us a scale of the hacking efforts by the Chinese government here.
Well, they're number one by far, more than the Russians. They have a number of techniques, some of which were revealed today, formally classified matters. There's this wonderful term I hope you'll start using called Stone Panda. It's the code name for the Chinese unit that's been doing this.
Sounds like a restaurant, but I like it.
And it seems to, according to this declassified material, it seems to go back 12 years. It seems to focus on American companies. The data that they stolen can help them in negotiations, business negotiations with American companies. They also get trade secrets. It's massive, and it seems to be focused on the high-end technology sectors that China would need to dominate by 2030 or 2035 in order to be the world leader. So in other words, they're going to steal their way to global leadership. Let's put it that way. It's more polite than domination. And the FBI is blowing the whistle today, along with the Deputy Attorney General. The pity is, as you know from our local press, there's been a big leak that Steve Mnuchin and the Treasury Department were going to offer sanctions today as punitive for these things that the DOJ and the FBI are finding. For some reason, at the last minute, Treasury pulled out. So they weren't at the announcement, and they're not putting the sanctions forward. So this leak shows dissent inside the Trump team. And of course, the Chinese have a strategy that Vice President Pence spoke about back in October, that they want to divide the Trump administration. They know they're hawks and doves. So this is good news. It raises public awareness for what China is up to. But there were no actual sanctions announced other than the indictment of these two Chinese hackers out of a possible 10,000 hackers, let's say.
Meanwhile, there are calls for more Russia sanctions.
Yes,
it just tells you everything. Michael Pillsbury, thank you very much for this and all you've done on this topic.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, for more than a month now, France has been racked by massive riots, the biggest in 50 years. The riots began in response to a planned gasoline tax. Why was the French government raising gasoline taxes? Obviously, climate agenda. Well, in Washington, people only care about Russia, so they've barely noticed this. They think a carbon tax is still a great idea. Such a great idea that outgoing Arizona Senator Jeff Flake has teamed up with Delaware Democrat Chris Coons to introduce a new bill that would impose a nationwide carbon tax. Ethan Behrman is a California radio host, and he joins us tonight. Ethan, thanks very much for coming on. So I think it's pretty clear from what's happening in France that maybe the public globally isn't on board with this because most people care about gas prices because they don't have their own planes or drivers. So why would you, in the name of fighting climate change, crush the most vulnerable in your society? That doesn't seem fair.
Well, we got two issues that are going on here. First off is in France, Emmanuel Macron, he actually did a massive tax cut on the rich. That's part of what these protests are about. It's not just about the gas tax. It's also the fact that the people feel like he was just giving away these giant tax cuts to the wealthy. That sounds familiar to the United States. Simultaneously, the U.S. proposal is actually fundamentally different from France. What Senators Flake and Coons put forward is a revenue-neutral carbon tax and dividend, meaning whatever tax money comes in gets distributed out to the American taxpayer. Now, it will be a progressive. No, it'll be progressive. So the lower end of the income scale, the larger
we're going to raise
dividend.
gas taxes and then filter the money through a massive unionized bureaucracy, and somehow it'll drip back down to you. But I thought trickle-down economics didn't work, but I guess we're for it now?
Well, that's not trickle-down economics. Trickle-down economics
I think it kind
means
of is, but it trickles through a public employee union first, right? There's a different kind of trickling, but you're still getting wet.
Yeah, but the difference here is, so we're using a market force to disincentivize pollution. Now, one of my big issues with the carbon tax is you can argue all you want about whether or not climate change is man-made or not. But we do know that mercury pollution is a potent neurotoxin. We do know that sulfur pollution has significant health effects. We do know that ground-based ozone, because of our burning of fossil fuels, causes people to die because they can't breathe. I'm a big fan of reducing pollution. If we can use market solutions to incentivize being more efficient and disincentivize polluting, I think that's reasonable.
Then look, I mean, some of this I can't weigh in on one way or another because I'm not a scientist, but I do understand who's getting the short end of the stick. Wouldn't it be a display of good faith if the people behind this legislation said the first thing we're going to do is ban all private air travel in this country? We're going to put you in prison if you get on a private plane because climate change is that serious. It's an existential threat to the planet, to the human race itself. So you can't fly in a private plane. And then we'll talk about taxing everybody else, like people who make 40 grand. Why not start that way?
So we actually agree on the private plane issue. I hate when people will tell me how to live my life and then they do the exact opposite. I can't stand hypocrisy.
Do you see that happening? Now, the politicians who fly constantly private and these actors who fly private and Al Gore who flies private lecturing you about your Suburban, that is a problem for you then?
I'm offended by that. I wrote about it in my book, actually.
Good for you.
I specifically
why don't we
pointed
just ban it? No, but seriously, if it's that serious a problem, let's just ban it. I mean, I don't want to be an authoritarian. I was always kind of libertarian. But climate change is too important, okay? So if you show up at the FBO, at the private airport, we're just going to put you in prison.
So no, I'm actually a little bit on your side here. I don't like banning things. No, because here's what happens with the carbon tax. Suddenly, your private jet, instead of it being $3,000 an hour, because of the tax on your burning of the fossil fuel, will suddenly cost you $5,000 an hour, and maybe some of the B-list celebrities will stop flying.
I guess I just take climate change a little more seriously than you do. You must be a denier. I don't want to see someone despoil the earth like that. So, every private plane banned.
Well, I don't think we have to ban them, but we make it expensive. We make it expensive, and then you'll think twice about doing it.
Ethan Berman, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, pretty much America, almost every college in America restricts free speech. Dramatically restricting free speech is, in fact, the signature fact of college. And it's grotesque. Can we do anything about it? That's after the break. America's college campuses were designed to be havens for free expression, and for good reason. Free speech is a requirement for free thought, and free thought is central to the idea of university. There's no other reason to have it. But it's at universities where those ideas, those freedoms, are now under the gravest threat. A new report by the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE, finds that 90% of American college campuses have some kind of speech code that restricts what their students are allowed to say, and by extension, and this is intentional, what's acceptable for them to think. When they can control what you say, they control what you think. Robert Shibley is FIRE's executive director, and he joins us tonight. Robert, thanks very much for coming on. So when you say there are speech codes, is that strictly speaking? I mean, are these rules that say you're not allowed to express certain ideas or say certain things, or are they informal?
Yes, these are literally formal rules telling you what you can and cannot say on college campuses. And you're right, about 90% of them have codes that, if it's a public university, are unconstitutional, or if it is a private university, violates their own promises of free speech. So FIRE only rates those codes that are written down. If a college is engaging in informal censorship, that's not even part of these ratings.
So I think, except for a small handful of colleges, every college in America receives federal funding, every one. So they would all be subject to the conventional protections, civil rights protection, voting rights. Why are they not required to uphold the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech?
Well, it's interesting. There are some civil rights protections. Title IX is probably the most well-known one, but some racial discrimination as well. Those do come. Those are requirements when you get federal funding. But actually, following the First Amendment is not one of those requirements. We don't make that requirement of colleges who take federal funds. But you're right; it's virtually all of them.
So why wouldn't it be pretty simple for Congress to pass a law saying if you're going to take tax dollars, you have to follow the Bill of Rights? That doesn't seem like a very tough ask.
Well, that is something that Congress could do, and it wasn't done back in the civil rights era. I think now you would see a lot of resistance on political bases, because I think people are, there's a lot of support out there, particularly among college administrators and folks who work at colleges, for these kind of restrictions. So I think you'd see a lot of opposition to that. I don't think you'd see a lot among your average Americans, though.
Man, well, if we ever get a Republican Congress, maybe they'll do it and build a wall and stuff like that, protect Americans. Here's hoping. Robert, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Jason Nichols is right in the middle of this debate. He's an actual professor. He teaches African-American studies at the University of Maryland, and a frequent guest on this show. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So it seems like kind of would be a baseline for a university to have pretty much absolute freedom of speech, a prerequisite for freedom of thought. Like, what's the point of having colleges if you can't say whatever you think?
Well, I think, number one, in society, we don't have complete freedom of speech.
True.
Of course, there's libel, there's defamation, there is, threats of violence and inciting violence.
Yes.
Those are limits on free speech. So I think we have this idea that freedom of speech means that you can say anything at any time.
No, we know what it is, because Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1967, the famous Supreme Court case, very specifically outlined the boundaries of free speech. And so libel is not allowed, of course. Imminent threats of violence are not allowed, but everything else is allowed. Everything else is allowed. And you would but it's not allowed at Apple or Amazon or some big authoritarian company, but colleges exist to be an oasis in the middle of our commercial society for free thinking. So why would they be the places where free thinking is punished most aggressively?
No, I agree that, there are many cases, and you and I actually discussed, a case a little while ago where there was a college professor who said something he shouldn't have said, and then all of a sudden people are talking about, oh, he needs to be fired, this is why we actually have tenure.
Right.
Is, to protect people so that they can say what it is that they want. But there have been all these attacks, there are these people who are trying to put limits on what it is you say, and I think that that's, problematic. But, I think overall colleges do protect freedom of speech.
So what would happen if you went into your class? Yeah, I kind of like that Donald Trump. And what do I like about him? I like the family separation policy. I like the wall. He's right that Mexico doesn't send us its best. Just kind of read portions of a Trump speech.
Sure.
How'd that work out for you?
I think students would disagree, and they'd have every right to disagree.
Of course they would. I would never contest that right.
As a matter of fact, even if they protested me, that's part of their First Amendment right.
You're not getting no debate from me on that. I believe in the free exchange of ideas, and despite the efforts to shut us down and shut us up, we're still doing it. But if you said that in a faculty meeting, no one would engage you. People would just say, you know what, I know you're African American, but you're obviously some kind of freaky bigot. You know what I mean? They would treat you like they treated Kanye West. Like, no one would engage you and say, let's talk through those ideas. You really think the family separation policy is a good idea? No. They would shout at you, wouldn't they?
Well, I think people would disagree, and I think they would have every right to disagree.
Yeah, of course. No, but I'm saying, I think that the whole idea of the college is you say one thing, I say another, and then we talk about them to get to wisdom. Isn't that the goal?
Sure, but I think the conversation doesn't always have to be comfortable.
That
means we can yell at each other. We can sit there and try to shut one another down. That's part of free speech.
Of course. I guess the macro question is, have you ever met a group of people with smaller minds than those who teach at America's colleges, less open to new ideas, to truly challenging concepts?
I think that's what we literally do on college campuses.
Really?
Is challenge concepts and challenge popular ideas. I think, number one, how
about this? One you go next faculty meeting and say, just for the record, abortion's murder.
Well, let me hold on, Tucker.
I just want to see how that works.
Let me tell you something. Every semester, we have abortion activists who come out and litter the campus with pictures of aborted fetuses.
Yeah.
And there are pregnant women who are walking across campus crying and all these kinds of things. It's still their First Amendment right.
Of course it is. I'm just saying, I'm just wondering if your colleagues...
no one complains.
But people complain. But what would your colleagues say if you said that?
I'm sure they'd be disgusted and they'd be upset with me.
They wouldn't be open to why is he saying that? What are the ideas behind that?
But they don't have to be
open
to it.
But they should be, because they're not supposed to be small-minded. They're supposed to be broad-minded.
No, these are people who have probably studied the issue and they have a particular view.
Come on.
Oh, they're dumb people. People who study for a living are dumb people.
Yeah. Well, amazingly, that's the irony wrapped in the riddle. You are none of those things, which is why we're so grateful that you come on the show. Thank you, Professor.
Thanks a lot, Tucker.
Good to see
Appreciate it.
Time now for final exam. Can you do better than the news professionals at remembering the news? A lot happened this week. What happened? We don't know. Do you? Find out after the break. Oh, the best and calmest moment of the week. Time now for final exam, where hardened news professionals compete to win an Eric Wempel mug and be crowned the ultimate news champion. This week's exam, we're pitting two of our top Fox News correspondents against one another, but gently. Lauren Blanchard and Griff Jenkins join us on the set. Griff is a long-time former champion, though I think every match you've won, you had an arm sling on.
We did. We had a 4-0 run in a sling. First time the sling came off, I lost.
Yeah. Well, we found out recently that Lauren is a very tough competitor, so best of luck to you, and of course to you.
Thank you.
All right. You know the rules. I'm going to repeat them, though, for our audience at home. Hands on buzzers. I ask the questions. The first one to buzz in gets to answer the question. This is key. You must wait until I finish asking the question in order to answer it. You can answer once I acknowledge you by saying your name. Each correct answer is worth a single point. Each incorrect answer detracts a point from your total, the cruel math of final exam. Best of 5 wins. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Good luck.
All right.
Good luck, sir.
Let's do it.
We're going to begin with a multiple choice question. In a marketing move that is either brilliant or insane, one fast food chain is now selling fire logs that make your whole house smell like their food. Is the restaurant A, Burger King, B, KFC, C, Domino's? Lauren Blanchard.
It is KFC.
B, KFC. Boy, you're definitive on that. Is it KFC?
If you are looking to kickstart your Christmas season, you might want to get yourself one of these. This is the KFC 11 Herbs and Spices Fire Log. This is a log I guess you put in your fireplace that smells like fried chicken. For real.
It smells like your car in college.
No. Absolutely not. That would not come into my house.
Sounds like my
I'm going to run out and get one now.
Lauren Blanchard, you are up by 1 point. All right, Griff, it's all you. Question 2.
Here we go.
Traffic in Los Angeles is notoriously awful, but thanks to the brilliance and the foresight of Elon Musk, relief may be on the way. The billionaire inventor just unveiled what new, faster way of getting around Los Angeles. Griff Jenkins.
Tunnel.
Tunnels under L.A.?
L.A. tunnels.
I don't believe you. Let's check the tape.
How about this? Underground tunnels to beat traffic congestion. Autonomous technology in the cars ensure that they don't run into each other, despite going speeds over 125 miles an hour.
Elon Musk, he's got some bright ideas.
Because when you're near the San Andreas Fault, what you want is to drive in a tunnel. Don't you think?
That would be a little trepidatious to go in there.
It's California. It won't even exist. All right, question 3. Congratulations on that. This week, a man in Missouri was sentenced to a year in prison for illegally poaching hundreds of deer. The judge also mandated that while the poacher is locked up, he is required to watch which classic Disney movie once a month? Lauren Blanchard.
Bambi.
Bambi?
Bambi.
Well, that's cruel and unusual. Is it Bambi?
A judge ordering the man who illegally killed hundreds of deer in Missouri to watch the Disney classic Bambi at least once a month during his 1-year jail sentence.
That's fantastic.
That man has eaten a lot of venison.
That is poetic justice there,
ways.
if there ever was.
Question 4, another multiple choice, so wait for each option. Forbes this week released its list of the richest celebrities of 2018. The top spot this year went to a filmmaker with a net worth of $5.4 billion. Was it A, George Lucas? Was it B, Steven Spielberg? Or C, James Cameron? Lauren Blanchard.
George Lucas.
George Lucas. Man, you're
Star Wars,
fast with
right?
that buzzer. Is it George Lucas of Star Wars?
Top 4, you ask? Michael Jordan. Oprah Winfrey, not a surprise. Steven Spielberg. And coming in at number 1, Star Wars creator George Lucas with a net worth of $5.4 million.
Billion.
Did I say? With a B.
Did you know that or did you guess?
No. I feel like I knew that one.
You feel like you knew that?
Star
How'd you do
Wars-
in
it
the
was
SAT?
I'm from Michigan. We don't really take the SAT for a lot
Right.
of Midwest schools, so ACT.
ACT. I bet you got 100.
I wish. No, my parents would have been a lot.
You have fast. I feel like
she's unbelievable.
I have two
dual
brothers.
draw.
I have had to fight for a lot of things growing up.
Yeah,
so.
I could tell. Boy, you were the
jumpy.
You were the first one. All right, final question. All right. Which 90s child actor, famous for starring in a very popular Christmas movie, has just reprised his role for a new ad for Google?
Macaulay Culkin. I always want to say
Macaulay Culkin. Is it
Home Alone.
Macaulay Culkin? Is he back?
Yep.
It's the Google. Yeah.
Google,
got it.
add aftershave to my shopping list. Hey, Google, remind me to clean these sheets later.
Okay, I'll remind you. Someone's at the front door.
Amazing. And I don't usually add an intro comment here, but I'm hearing from my judges who have all the metrics in front of them on the final exam control room board. And they're saying that both of you have buzzed in, but your reflexes are so lightning quick, you're like a ninja. They're impressed.
It is. It's like, the old Western movies where the guy's like,
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Like, that's it. I would never
Dead
do it.
before you hit the ground.
Yeah.
Right.
Griff, great job.
Thank you.
Lauren,
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Nice
And
job.
we're going to award you, as we traditionally do, the Eric Wemple mug. He works for Jeff Bezos' website. And we've had some demand from his relatives for this mug. So that's how coveted it is. I think they feel the same way as we do about him. He's atop, by the way, our Christmas tree. We have an Eric Wemple Christmas tree. And I want you to drink your coffee of that every morning and think of us and him.
I will.
Great to see
I will
you both.
do that.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas to both of you.
Merry Christmas.
That's it for tonight's final exam. Watch the news closely each night. Tune in every Thursday to see if you can beat the professionals. I don't know if you can. We'll be right back. Well, CNN just hates it when you call them fake news. The governor's brother gets all upset, but occasionally it fits. They promote it. Here's one case. A guy called Klaus Relodius was an investigative journalist for Der Spiegel. That's the biggest paper in Germany. A couple of years ago, CNN honored him as Journalist of the Year. Now he's been canned. He was caught inventing many of his stories. And it's probably not that surprising. They were absurd stories. One example is his profile of a Minnesota town called Fergus Falls. It had a lot of Trump supporters, so he went and stayed for a number of weeks to mock them. The article he wrote was full of absurd claims intended to make the residents sound ridiculous. At one point, he said the movie American Sniper was still playing to sold-out crowds 2 years after its release. That's how dumb they were in the Trump town. Well, it took years for him to be caught, and one of the main reasons is that he wrote exactly what his audience wanted to hear. And, of course, CNN never noticed. They wanted to hear it, too. Author and columnist Mark Stein joins us tonight, a longtime fan of Der Spiegel. This guy was kind of hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, this is a very traditional kind of story that Europeans and people of what one might call a Eurocentric bent, such as CNN, enjoy. They like to send their reporters out into the great wastelands of the American interior and report back that all the people there are inbred, stump-toothed, snake-handling crazies who like nothing better than a jigger of moonshine and a bunk up with their sister before they go down to have their church renamed after Trump and do a couple of scripture readings from the Art of the Deal. So basically, this guy, no, you laugh, Tucker, but that is actually what these newspapers and magazines want. And they're prepared to give you awards for it. Like this guy got Journalist of the Year. A guy called Matthew Engel at The Guardian, his editors told him to go out to the most backward parts of America and find the most inbred crazies to write about. And his heart wasn't really in it, so he went to a suburban Olive Garden restaurant and wrote it up as if he was Stanley in Africa, discovering Livingston. That's how they think of the interior of America. This guy was completely ridiculous. He says the town manager was a virgin who had never been to the ocean, and these guys in Fergus Falls post a photograph of the town manager standing on the ocean shore with the woman he lives with. I mean, this guy got there, discovered the story wasn't there, but decided to write it for his readers anyway.
Can
and
I
that
ask
is
you
a lot of what news is
super
about.
quick? Well, I first met you when you were writing for about 5 different English newspapers. You've been a newspaper man, a journalist for many years.
Right.
So you know the answer. Do you think journalists are getting dumber, or is it just my imagination?
Oh, no, I think I think the herd mentality of all, like, sitting around in the Washington Bureau or whatever, and the idea of actually all agreeing on I think the groupthink, the herd mentality is far worse than it was 20 or 40 years ago.
Good. Thank you. I needed a reality check. The great Mark Stein. Thanks a lot. It's fantastic.
Thanks, Tucker. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas. The current battle over border wall funding says everything about the state of modern American leadership. Washington easily agrees on funding an endless war in Afghanistan, giving aid to foreign countries, handing tax breaks to powerful tech monopolies. But protect America's sovereignty, help actual Americans secure the border. Whoa! Sitting in for Sean for a second time. That's a good sign.
Yeah, isn't it? It's like a Dan Bongino doubleheader or something, Tucker. I'll be with you tomorrow.